Hello, my name is Dan Humberg, and I'm representing HarvestFires.com. If you're watching this video, you're probably somehow interested or facing the installation of a tin kit for a Firestop system on a combine harvester. This video addresses the tin set for a CaseIH model 7250 combine harvester. What I do in this video is to step through the CAD model of all of the tin pieces involved in the kit, and it's a chance for me to talk through how they interact with each other, show them spatially, suggest things with regard to the installation order and things that you want to do. The visibility of the tin pieces is pretty good in this video because of the color coding and stuff that the CAD system does, and so I think it's a very useful video for you to look at once or twice with regard to how those tin pieces go together. It may help you if you're assembling the tin set on the bench prior to going on the combine, which I strongly recommend that you do, so that you have an idea how those pieces go together and so that you pre-thread the holes where the screws hold the tin together. But there are some things that I'll show and talk about in here that even in the installation video on the combine, the current one that I'll probably be editing here, might not be quite what you see in here, because after getting on the combine and shooting video to make that installation video, I ended up changing some of the tin pieces on this tin set because of issues that came up during that installation, and I may not get back to that combine and do a completely new tin installation set. So if there's a discrepancy or question, I would probably pay attention to this CAD model rather than just the video that I pieced together while sitting inside the hole on the combine and putting the pieces on. So I'll try and point those out when we do this video, or when we step through this set of parts. But in general, this is probably the most current set of parts, even more current than the one where I was putting the tin on the combine. What you're looking at is a three-dimensional computer-aided design model of the tin set that goes around the exhaust components on the 7250. I can rotate it around here, and I'll do that almost continuously to show different things. And then I'll step through the parts and kind of the order that we would put those parts on the when assembling it on the combine, and try and tell you whatever I can about it. I have currently left the biggest piece that covers over the top of the whole exhaust system off. I can unhide that and show it to you later on, but it's useful right now to be able to rotate this around and look at the bottom of it, the back side, which would be where the engine is. But it's also useful to be able to look down inside the tin set here, because I can talk about some things that we'll do from the inside as you assemble it. And then one of the last things I'll do is put that top piece back on so you see the complete enclosure. I want to start over here at the left end. This would be, let's see if I can get this rotated around to where it makes the most sense. That's about, looking at it like this, we would be sitting in the hole between the grain tank and the engine, looking at the engine, and the exhaust manifold goes across the full length of this, from the left to right. Your radiator fan would be off to our left, the unloading auger off to the right in this direction, and so the exhaust manifold here on the engine block is underneath this all the way from one end to the other. When we start installing the tin set, we'll start on this end. This end cap, I think it's probably piece number 1. By the way, your pieces will be marked with a number C75 for case 7250, and then a number cut usually into a flange where it overlaps something, so the holes in it don't really matter, but it'll give you the part numbers there. So this is the first part, and it folds up into a piece shaped like what we're looking at here. Covers the left end of the exhaust manifold, and it'll drop down in place fairly easily around the end of that. There is a beveled set of flanges on the end here that allow it to clear. There's a aluminum fin, must be a cooling related to coolant somehow, that comes off of the engine over here and ducts right down underneath here, and I had to bevel this to clear that. So this piece folded up like this, and the video that shows you how to bend the tin will show you how to fold this up, but this video, the one we're looking at here, is also useful for visualizing how do I bend that tin piece up. And so if you have struggle with the video I made on the bench about how to fold tin, again, you can come back to this one. So that's piece, I think, number one, and it doesn't fix to anything immediately, and when you put it in there, you'll just drop it down in there and then come back with this second piece, this one, and we'll slip that down in there as well. It will wrap underneath the exhaust manifold. It has a tab on the back here, a little 3/8 inch tab that should sit, I think this first one will sit on top of, there's a casting boss in the block. It's a kind of like a bar that sticks out of the block a little bit, goes the full length of the block left to right, and so some of these tabs, like this first one here on the back, will sit on top of it, and then the next one over will alternate, will bend. I don't show it bent in this one because I didn't bend them in the CAD model, but this one would be bent down 90 degrees, and we'd tell you how to do that in the tin bending video. I get this back centered to where you can see it. This little tab would probably be bent down. This one we would leave flat. This one we would bend down. This one we'd leave flat. So they kind of alternate. The ones that bend down butt up against that casting boss, so that it keeps the registers where this thing stops against the block, and the ones that sit on top of the boss support the pieces there, so that it kind of registers the locations of these going along there. So we're back to this blue piece here. That goes in, and you can put the screws through that connect it to the first piece. There's one here, might be one even right there, here, and up here. The holes on top are for the deck to screw down to, but you got 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5 screws that you can put through to link those two pieces together. While we're here, I want to point out this piece underneath, this orange thing. That is an L-shaped tab that has a slot in it here. Your combine will have a bracket underneath here that's bolted to the block with it'd be an 8mm bolt with a 13mm head. And that bracket supports these tubes that come down here. Somehow it captures those or supports those tubes. They didn't used to do that, and I used to use this as an attachment point all the time for pieces on the earlier combines. You can still do that, but what you have to do is loosen that bolt up on here. You have to loosen it, and so that bracket can come off of the post kind of thing on the block that it's screwed into or bolted to, and then you can slip this piece with that slot behind that bracket, so it goes, is underneath it and straddles that bolt. And then, but to make it to fit on here, you'll have to match these holes then up against the 3 holes in the bottom of this blue piece and get 1, 2, or 3, ideally 2 or 3 screws up through there into this piece to hold it on. And it's difficult to reach there. It's easy to show it in the CAD model. It is not necessarily easy to reach on the machine because there's junk in the way here. There's your compressed air line to the from the air filter comes right through this area, so it's tight. But you can do it. You can slide it behind there, and that will, when you do that, eventually when you tighten up that bolt, and I wouldn't do it till the tail end of the process, but it will hold this whole end of the lower part of this thing against the block tightly, so it keeps it from rattling and stuff like that. So that's what that piece is for. It's actually piece number 21 or something like that, but this is where it goes on. So we've got the first 2 pieces screwed together here, and then you can put this piece in place if you're able to get it in there. You may curse a little bit in the process, but you should be able to get that piece on there. It probably won't keep the system from working if you don't get that one on there, but I don't want to tell you not to do it, because it's nice to have this thing tightly held up against the block, instead of where the top will be held up against by something, but the bottom here wouldn't otherwise, and it could rattle around a lot, and I don't want it to do that. Okay, that's that piece. The third piece, or the next piece, I guess, would be 1, 2, or 3, probably piece number 3, is this gold colored one. Same shape as what the blue one is here. They fit together. I just have to do them in pieces because you can't stick the whole thing in there. It's just too awkward to get the pieces down in place. Again, this one, the tab on the bottom of this one might be bent down 90 degrees to butt up against that casting boss. And when you put it in here, you'll have to weasel it around so that it slips underneath the blue, this piece represented by the blue one. Once you get it in place, you should be able to reach underneath here and get at least one of these two screws holding the bottom tabs together, bottom pieces together. It may be difficult to reach them both. That's why I put two in there. You want at least one, and if you can get them both, you can. I gave you a little tiny stubby screwdriver to hold the screws up to reach under there and try and get that in place. It's a tight location, but you should be able to do that. These on the outside are easier to reach. They're closer to you. There's still stuff in the way, but you can get them. You can reach them with that little stubby screwdriver, and the ones on top with a longer screwdriver, maybe your little driver gun or cordless drill or whatever that you're putting screws in with. So now you got this piece covering the left side of the manifold. The next two pieces that I think I would put on are actually the gray and blue piece here, this upper gray one and the bottom blue one that divide the exhaust turbine inside from the compressor turbine, which is right here. Let's make this a little smaller and get it up where I know you can know it's in your field of view. So the compressor turbine is right here, and you'll need to slip the blue one underneath the turbocharger bearing in between the exhaust turbine and the compressor turbine, and the gray one over the top. And they seem to fit pretty good when I did the install. But you bring those two together, and the way you put them together is down inside here. We can zoom in a little bit, I think. I have 1, 2, 3, 4 holes that will allow you to put screws through from the right side through here towards the left. You may not be able to use all of those because that compressor turbine is behind there, and some of those screws may bump into the compressor turbine itself, and that would push the tin away. It just won't work. But these two on the outside, I think you may be able to get through because they should clear outside of that compressor turbine housing. And then these are farther enough inside that there are some recesses in that housing, and these one or more of these screws might be able to go through here and nest inside the recesses inside that compressor housing. So, and those would go through from the right to the left. That's the inside of the enclosure to the outside. There's a few places where that's advantageous. This is one of them. So you get 1 or 2 of these screws, or perhaps as many as all 4 of them together, and that will hold these two pieces together. Also, if we look back here, closer to the exhaust manifold, here's a hole up here, and there's one down here as well. This one I think you may have trouble getting a screw to because the exhaust turbine is in the way here. But this one up here we can flip over and look from the outside. That one runs right ahead of the exhaust manifold here, and I gave you a long screwdriver as a part of the kit. You should be able to reach in here, you might with a cordless drill and that long screwdriver, and spin a screw in through this tab on the gold piece that would then go through the gray piece and then bite into the blue piece and bite into the gray one up here. And that will tie this gold one, the gray one, and the blue one together, and that's really useful. So do that one if you can, if you possibly can. We'll go on to the next piece then. The next one I would put in once you have the left side of the manifold covered in this piece above and below wrapped around the turbo bearing here, screwed together. The next one that we would put in place is this lighter blue one back here that I'm highlighting. He will slip in from the right hand side here, from over here, from the right to the left. Behind there, you may also be able to push it up underneath here and work it in there, but it's a tight space under there, you may think, this thing's never going to go in there, but it will. You can find a way to snake it in there. Once you get it snaked in, it's going to slip around the pressure line that comes up to serve oil to the turbocharger bearing. That's what this hole is in here, is for that oil line to come up through. And the hole is larger than the oil line, and I've measured and now tested it with a prototype and revised it and everything. That, yeah, I want to try and get it so that it comes cleanly through that hole for you, but I can't guarantee that every one of those oil lines is identical from combine to combine, so you could have to adjust here. You'll notice if I zoom in on this that there are a bunch of cuts around the edge of these and pedals, and the idea behind those is that once you're on the machine, I wouldn't necessarily do it before you try these pieces, but you would bend these pedals with the tip of needle nose pliers, especially when you know the oil line will come through the center of this somewhere. If it comes through the edge, you may have to work more on that edge than the other edge. But you bend those pedals so that they run parallel to that oil line. That way you got a flat surface, and we don't ever end up with a sharp, hard tin edge vibrating against that oil line that serves engine oil to the turbocharger bearing, because I don't ever want to abrade that line. I don't want any chance that you'd ever cut that or damage it. So these pedals are there to be able to bend to give you additional clearance, but also to give a flat surface that faces that line rather than a thin, sharper edge here. Same thing on this piece. You can see the pedals there. And so these are on the inside. They would probably be best bent up. These on this gold or brown piece could be bent down on this side, probably need to be bent up into the kit up here, and then there are some on the piece in the back as well, and those would probably be best bent down if you need to bend them, because then they go down out of the way. But make sure that you got clearance around that oil line when you put it together so that you don't take any chance of damaging that. So we've slipped this piece in from right to left, and then we want to try and fix it in there. If we can get under from the left side, there are two screw holes here, and this will sit above the rest on top of that tab. I can highlight there. I can highlight that tab. You can see it light up as orange or yellow, gold, and it'll sit on top of that tab from the piece on the left. And with a little bit of luck, you can get underneath with your left hand behind here and get a screw up through that, probably this hole, but maybe that one and this one, or at least one of the two. You'd like to tie them together. That will require that little tiny stubby screwdriver, and it may take 10 minutes to feel under there and get that hole and get it to line up with that and bite in. That's why you want to have run a screw through the upper piece here, the blue piece, while you assemble it on the bench, so that when you do have to get that screw in there underneath, if it hits the hole, it has threads to go right in, and you don't have to try and thread that hole on the fly. So we get that piece in there. It also comes up behind this dark blue piece down here and this is at an angle down here. This is more or less flat. Let's see, make sure you're in the field of view again. This is more or less flat, angles down a little bit. This goes down vertically, and then this is at an angle. If we look down in here, here's a screw hole in this blue piece, and with a little bit of luck we could get down in there with the long screwdriver driver bit from up just like this angle, looking down there, and shoot through there right alongside that oil line, because it's going to be in the way here, sort of. It'll go down there, but if you can get that long driver with a screw on the end of it, those square screws will stick on the end of your driver bit. You can poke it through that hole and bite it into the one behind and pull the blue piece, dark blue piece, up to the light blue piece. Try and do that. The idea behind this hole here is the same thing, but it's going to tie this brown piece to that one in the back. So we get the blue one screwed in place over here and down here. There also is one on this vertical face. If you can get the screwdriver at a low enough angle to bite in there, you can put that one in as well. It's going to be about just enough room for the driver and the bit to get through between the oil line and this wall and poke back in there. But if you can hit that at an angle, it'll make it go in. Then you get another screw to hold that together. So that's this piece. I forget the number of the piece. It's probably 6, I think. Once we get that one, we come to this big bottom panel, this probably piece number 7, brown one. Oops, my mistake. That one has a cutout up here and here to wrap around the oil line. It'll slide through from the underside, and it should, I believe it will, I think it will lay on top of the gray one. They kind of show, see this kind of weird pattern in here. That means that when I did the tin model, those two tin things are occupying the same space, and one is not laying on top of the other. They're actually in the same space, and so it didn't know which one it wants to show, because they're both there. I think the brown one should probably lay on top. Well, it could go behind too. It could go behind the but I think the way I've got the holes cut here, the brown one should go on top, slip up above the blue one, and then the screw going through here will start through the brown one and bite into the blue-gray one behind. This piece also has a larger hole in it here. That's for your return line for the oil leaving the turbocharger bearing to drop through. That line goes more or less vertically down out of the bottom here. And again, it's hard to know exactly where it's going to be on every combine, but what we've done here is cut a larger hole for it to fit around there, and then again these pedals. These would all probably, they could be bent up or down. It wouldn't really matter in this case. I probably would bend them up when I think about it here a little bit. Just bend them with the tip of a needle nose pliers, no more than what you need in order to make them run parallel to the line. Keep the space around the line as small as possible, but don't let these edges, sharp edges, touch that line or come up against it. When we get done with putting it on, it would be an excellent, and I should say mandatory concept, to go underneath here with a few pieces of that foil tape that I provide with the kit. It's a strong aluminum foil tape with a really good adhesive on it, and you could put pieces around here to stick on this to minimize the space around that oil line for air to leak out there. It doesn't matter whether a little bit leaks out there, but we don't want a big hole here for a lot of air to leave in one spot. Kind of want it to ooze out everywhere. So you can tighten this up. The other thing you can do is make sure this thing isn't going to rattle then around that oil line with that tape. You kind of get it locked in place or immobilized with that tape. So bend those as necessary to make it come through there. Bend them to make sure that they run parallel to it instead of any sharp edge near that line that drops down there. And then this brown piece will screw up from underneath pretty easily, actually, to the dark blue piece here. And so now we continue to work left to right, adding pieces. So we got that one on. The next one we put in place, I think I would probably put in place this one. That would probably, I think it's maybe piece number 9, but I'm not sure about the part numbers right now on these. But I think that's what I would call piece number 9. Again, it's going to have to slide in probably from right to left or from underneath, but I believe this one will probably come from behind and above and then drop down in here and slide left to right. It fits, it looks to me like it fits underneath this one, and underneath, well, the next one will fit on top of it. So this one comes in, slides underneath here. I would like to think that you're going to be able to get these screws in here, but I'm not sure. You would need to be somebody with a really small arm and small hands to be able to reach under from the right hand side to get underneath there, because all we got above this is the exhaust manifold. So it's about 3 inches here, and it's just a tight space. But if you can reach back in there with that little stubby screwdriver, you can go from bottom up, get a screw started in there, and pull these two together. Otherwise, there's no way to do it from above because the exhaust manifold covers this whole area up right now. If you try to get those 1 or 2 of those screws in there, if you can't do that one, then we would try real hard to get one in here. This is where it slopes down at an angle, and we can go from the inside with a long driver bit and reach, kind of angle it down in here and hit that one. The exhaust turbine housing is going to be in the way here, but you may be able to get under and get that one hooked together to lock those two together if possible. So we get that one slid in place and try to get a couple of screws in here. I also have places for screws on the vertical face here, and they would have to be reached from outside to inside. I'm just not sure whether you can get, it's going to be challenging to get them in, but if you can get one of those in, that would be great as well. You might have to reach down behind the exhaust system in here with that little stubby screwdriver, or if you can get in at an angle with the long screwdriver, it'll be one of those two. So we get that piece in there and held with a couple of screws or a few screws in that location. Put as many screws in as you can possibly reach, but it's easy to do them in the CAD model. It's not always easy to do it in real life. When you get on the machine, there's so much junk in the way. So if you can't get them all in, it doesn't mean it won't work. It's just that you want enough together so that it doesn't rattle loose. Okay, so that piece will sit in there. The next one we would do, I'm going to roll it upside down a little bit, look at it from the bottom, is this piece I'm highlighting now. I think it's piece number 8. I can roll it around and look in from the top. It's there, it's highlighted again. You see the borders of it. That's an easy piece to get in. It will slide in from this direction, slide in here on top of the that whatever you color that light brown piece, this golder piece will slide in on top of that, and it's got 3 screw holes from the bottom, and they're relatively easy to reach. There are also these back here that will butt up against that angled face, and if you can reach those with screws from the inside here, you can hit those two and tie this tightly together back there, and that's helpful as well. But the outer ones here are pretty easy to screw on, and that piece will slip in there and be in the right spot. It should go in underneath this blue one, so as you're doing it order wise, you want to make sure it's sliding underneath that blue piece. I believe it's underneath there. I'm looking at the size of the holes, and yeah, I think it goes in underneath this as if the screw back here is going to come from the bottom up. I'm not sure you're going to be able to reach that screw from the bottom up. You could put a screw in here from the top down, but it would go through the small hole first, and it wouldn't necessarily bite into the piece underneath, although it would register it to make it in the right spot. So that's piece number, I believe, number 8. It's not too hard to put in place. Okay, so we get that piece in place, we get this piece in place. Next one I would go to would be this one here. I will also point out that see this rectangular opening here that shows up in between these two? That has to fit around an arm that's in part of an actuator for the exhaust choke that's right in here. It goes from a hydraulic actuator thing underneath, a swing arm, and then this link goes up through here to actuate a kind of a choke in the exhaust system. You need to make sure that you have to get this fit around that. So this piece, you might end up bending this piece a little bit to fit it up over that, and then bend it back down in place so that arm comes up through here. And it needs to clear that. So for any reason that arm, when you can reach under and swing that arm and move it through its range of motion to make sure it clears here. Having fit one now on a 7250, I think that it'll clear that, but if it shouldn't, you can always trim a little bit out of here with a tin snips to make sure that it clears. You'd have to take the piece out and do that, but it should clear here. And that link should run through here and leave a little bit of space. If it's too much space, you can always fill in a strip on each side of it with that foil tape to minimize the gap around it, so that again we don't lose a lot of air through that spot. Then this piece will slide in from right to left, and it has the same kind of issue. It's got this cutout in it that will fit around that link that comes up through here and made up to this piece. It looks like it's meant to sit on top of the previous one here. Oops, didn't mean to do that. Sit on top of it, and then these two holes back here are really meant to be reached from underneath, but I don't, and you might be able to do that again if you have small hands and somebody can reach their arm around in behind there, put a screw in from underneath. That would be great. I believe in the production tin I also have another screw out here, hole out here, that's meant to go from top down, and that you should be able to reach here, because I think the exhaust manifold is just back far enough that we can go straight down and connect these two together from the inside with a screw. And that's relatively easy, so look to do that one if you can. It'd be like the one over here, right out here at the outer edge where we can reach it. So we screw that one on there in place. It overlays the previous place, fits around that link that comes up through here, and then now you have some screws in here that we can probably reach to get these pulled together as well. You might notice that there's a big hole here. That hole accommodates the split between the exhaust choke above it. That's a cast iron piece, and on your combine it will be probably wrapped in an aluminum foil blanket. And it's connected underneath via about 3 kind of cast iron posts, one here, and one somewhere out about here, I think, connected to a box underneath. That's the actuator and control box for that exhaust choke. And I didn't want to enclose that, so we had to split between the two. This will kind of come up against that aluminum foil blanket, and it should come pretty close to sealing up around that. These pieces should fit close enough that we don't lose a lot of air around the perimeter where there has to be a little bit of a gap. The center part will be filled up by the connection between the actuator underneath and the choke above. So we got this piece in place, screwed on here and here. We go to this next one over here to the right. Let's get that in the center field of view. And I'll try and rotate him around a little bit. Okay, this piece is the last one back underneath the exhaust manifold, which runs up here. Again, it'll slip in. Probably have to go kind of in from underneath, because there's a bunch of junk over here on the right that it doesn't show up in the CAD model. It'll slip on up there. This T-shaped opening will wrap. There's an oil line that's in there that comes out of the block or whatever, and so this will slip around that. There we can see it a little bit better. So this piece slopes down just a little bit, but it'll slip around that oil line, and the oil line will come in and sit in this end of the T, I hope. It should. It did on the combine I was on. If yours doesn't fit there, when you get this piece, make sure it's in the right spot, but if it doesn't, you could trim out there, but you shouldn't have to. So that piece will go fit around that oil line, and there is also an electrical, it's the block heater, I think. That's a 110 volt wire that comes down, and it's usually tied to that oil line, and it also will come through that hole where that T slot is. Again, these tabs in the back will sit on top of or bend down and fit up against that casting boss. This thing back here fits around a kind of a post that in the casting of the block that sticks out there, and this notch here fits around kind of the nameplate for the engine. It's got an aluminum, I don't know if it's serial number plate or whatever it is, that's the manufacturer plate that's on the end of that, so this will fit around that. So you get that piece slid in place. It should screw on. I think maybe both of these screw holes are visible from above, like I'm doing here. If not the inner one, then the outer one, but hopefully both. And later we'll use this one over here as well. Then once that piece is in place, you should also be able to reach down in or go with a long screwdriver and get this one screwed down here to the previous piece. So now we got a set of pieces that runs underneath the manifold the full length of the engine block. And we're looking down inside here. The next piece that I would put in place would be this light gray one in here. I'd call it a pan probably. It slips in from the outside from this direction. Let's look at it from out here. Oops. So it'll slide in from where you're sitting here underneath the exhaust system. If we look down inside, we want it to lay on top of these tabs on the two dark gray pieces back there. So it should lay on top of them, and then there's a series of holes in it here where we can put a screw down from the top, like looking down like this, probably with a fairly long driver bit because the exhaust pipe and everything is right in here. Reach down and screw all four of those, I think, should go in that way and hold that together. That will register that piece really well together. The other screws that will hold that one in place right down here, they come up from the bottom. Underneath here, they're easy to reach. So they'll come up from underneath the bottom and screw through this gold kind of colored piece up into that pan. So notice the pan slips in on top of that, and you can easily screw that in there. So now that's locked. Now things are going to start to get more rigid because everything's getting screwed together. So we've got that pan on. The next piece after that is this right-hand end, which is a bit of a bugger. Now when I put it on the new combine in the local lot here, that was a pain in the butt. I've changed it a little bit to try to make it easier for you to get it in place. In the past, or in the one I put on, I'm going to show you this over here, I had the top of it, I had a bunch of fingers cut on to fit up against it looks like a muffler, but it's not. It's the diesel exhaust catalyst up here, kind of like a catalytic converter. It's stainless steel, big round or big can, cylindrical can. But it's a tight space between this wall here that we're putting in place and all the framing stuff outside it. And so those fingers, which you are meant to bend to fit up against that can, they really get in the way. And then nothing just seemed to fit right there. It was just too tight to get it in. So I cut off a bunch of that top of that in this one, and we have a separate piece that'll slide up inside against that can, and you can screw in place, and I think that will be easier to make it fit. So this piece we're going to come and slide. We're going to bring it up from underneath in the back here, work it up in place between the exhaust pipe that comes up inside here and the framing that's off to our right. So we have to work it up in there so that it comes underneath these tabs underneath, fit up underneath the stuff that we already had in place. And these are 90-degree tabs. They should slide up and support the pan on the bottom, this piece in the back here, and up here, this little tab here should slip underneath near where that oil line comes through. That's the idea, that they slip up there and support that. You may or may not be able to get like a screw in that one, but it'll still support this thing and tighten it up there to wrap around there. I think what I did on the CAD model for these pieces was made the perforations where you bend this longer so that they can bend easier, so that you can bend these in place by hand if necessary to shove them up there. At least these back ones. This long one maybe not so much. But that should slide up from underneath, and this front end of it up here will go right up against the block. There's a machined surface on the head, I think it is, or the block there that'll go right up against that. So that piece is not real easy to get in place, but you should be able to bring it up from underneath, get it in place. When you get it up underneath, then you can put screws here from the bottom, 1, 2, perhaps 3 on there, and maybe 1 in the back, to tie it to this piece underneath. And it should have lots of clearance because I've cut it off here, so it comes up only part way up to that tin can, and then we'll fill that in with this separate piece that's highlighted there now. So we get that one in place. I believe the next one I would do would be this, I don't know what you call that color, but that piece. It's pretty easy to get at and reach, so that it screws to the bottom piece down here and to the right hand end here. And you can put a screw in here and here, and it'll line everything else up so the rest of them go in pretty easily. So we got that one in there. I think that having that one in there is probably the point at which I would come in and slide this one, this new one, which I've never installed before because I wanted to make it easier to install. So that piece is cut with the curve to fit up against the diesel exhaust catalyst can, but it can slide up inside there. You'll have to go from slip it in place here and then slide it up tight against that can. And when we're up snug against that can, you could put a screw. You have to shoot a screw through. There are places for 4 of them here from inside to outside, and a long driver bit, and those are self-drilling, self-tapping screws, so you can shoot them through there. I probably would do one in the front and one in the back, because it's possible we may end up adjusting that. You need to know that this is all held up in the right position before you, because once you screw that on there up against the diesel exhaust catalyst can, you're not going to be able to adjust much after that up or down, because that'll limit where you can move it. But if we got the whole thing in place correctly and slide that just up against that can and screw it in place, it'll make a relatively good seal against that can, probably better than the fingers I have on this side. So put that in there with the idea that, well, you could end up pulling those screws and re-screwing them in if we decide later that you need to adjust it a little bit before we get done. But so we put that one in place. Next one is this side that's darker here. It's shaped just like it looks. It's got this long wedge thing here and a flange on the back side up here, and then it should also come up against that diesel exhaust catalyst can. But this side we got enough room to work that I left these fingers on here. And if we zoom in on those, these can be bent by hand a little bit. I would probably bend them out towards us here, and just enough so that when you push it in place, they press up against the bottom of that cylindrical can, the diesel exhaust catalyst can. You may have to tinker with that just a little bit to make sure you get it so that it fits up against, the screw holes line up here, and yet it fits up against that can. And they're pretty easy to adjust, I think, on this side. So then with that, if you get that fit up against that can, you can now put screws here, here, here. This one I would leave out because we're going to use it later. But anyway, you can put screws through there to hold that piece together to this one in the back. Once that one's in place, we'd swing around and put this gold piece in place here. Now we're getting to some that are easier. This is right in front of you. There's nothing really in the way. It slides in there or slips in there and screws 1, 2, 3, 4 screws along the bottom. We'll hold it in place for now. This thing, it goes in later. This light gray thing goes in later. Next one is the light blue one to its left. That is also relatively easy to position because it's right close to you and there's nothing in the way. It'll slip around this one up against the bottom one here, the flange on the bottom, and you can put screws through here down the right hand side of it and across the bottom, and 1 or 2 up here. I would probably leave these till later just in case because we're going to hit something else with them. So 1 or 2 up from the bottom here. With that piece in place, and that piece has this little cutout here that fits around. That wastegate actuator sticks out this corner. It's kind of a little cylindrical can thing with a pneumatic line on the end and an actuator arm rod that sticks out the other end of it. On the one I fit out here, this fit not too bad. It fits pretty close around there. If you have to, you could trim a little bit, but no more than absolutely necessary to fit around that can. You want it to fit close to that, and then we'll tape up around it later. But this piece should fit pretty well around that, or at least it did for me. When we get that one done, and I would not screw these, like I said before, I'd probably leave these screws out for right now. I would probably put the top on next. Okay, so now I show the top on, the lid I'd call it. It fits on top of everything else that we've done so far, kind of, except this blue piece, dark blue piece, this corner up here isn't in place yet. And I think that if it works for you, and it should, we'll put the top on and get at least a few screws on to hold it on. I would, again, it's going to fit around that wastegate actuator that comes out this corner. You may have to bend this little bit up here. These are cut so that you can bend them up to fit close to that without having to make lots of clearance. They can fit right up over the top of it, kind of. These little tabs here and here and here. With that in place, you can put a screw down through here, for instance, and here, and maybe back here, to start to anchor this thing in place. And then, well, you could go all over with screws, but I probably would just put a few in first, and we can screw it all down tight later. Once you get that located with enough screws to make sure that it's lined up with the other pieces on top here, then we can take this blue corner piece. I don't remember what the number of that piece is. It's like 19 or something like that. It will slip underneath this outer face, underneath this one here. You can see it disappears underneath there, and I believe that this tab on top would lay over the top of the lid that we just put on, and it's got fingers on this end to be able to bend to fit up against the end of that wastegate actuator can, and yet kind of make it form fit to that by bending those little fingers. So that's what you do. You bend them out a little bit, and you can push them back in as necessary once you have it in place, but it'll slip in between the compressor turbine. It's going to be tight, right? Tight up against the compressor turbine back here, underneath this one, and over the top of the lid, and then you can put screws through the outer face here and on top up here to hold it all tight together. And then you can squeeze these fingers back in around that can, and later we'll tighten this up with some of that foil tape around there. That'll be one of the last things you do, is to put tape on these edges and stuff and minimize any leaks that can come in there. You'll have to take the pneumatic line off the end of that wastegate actuator in order to put these pieces on, but it's easy. It's got one of those little pliers, clamps things that holds it on, so that one's easy to do. So we got that piece in place and the lid on. If we come around here, we got this dark blue piece we haven't worked with yet. Okay, if we've done everything else right, that piece should fit onto the deck, onto the lid here. There's 3 screw holes down there, and some up the sides here that will hit the flange on this side that I can highlight there, and the flange on the back side. Let's see, there should be a flange here somewhere. There, hit that flange on the back side. You may need to adjust the bend in the top of this here. If we hit that diesel exhaust catalyst down here or something like that, you may need to bend this whole top piece out a little bit more to make it fit up against that. That's the intention, is that this fits up against that and kind of seals up against it. Also, these fingers over here, you can bend out as necessary when you put that piece in, and then push them back up against the can again so that they fit tight up against it once it's in place. But you got screws that will hold these together, this hold together, and once we have that on, we got the worst of it done. So we have if it all goes according to plan, we've got all of the pieces put together, and we've enclosed the exhaust system. A couple other things I'll point out. What we haven't done is bolted it to the block on top yet. Back here is a hole, a notch in this in the deck, in the top piece. That you've got that block heater line will go down through that hole, and so that will fit it, and it should fit in that hole. However, you can also cut, if your piece doesn't come that way, you can cut a couple of little petals in here if you need to with a tin snips and bend them up again so that they clear that block heater line and don't abrade it so that it cuts through. You cut through the insulation on that, you'll pop your breaker when you turn the block heater on. So that runs down through there, and then on this back flange, this vertical flange on the back of the top, it's about 1.5 inches tall, has a series of slotted holes in it, and those will line up with empty threaded holes in the head or the block. I think it's the head though, and I believe those are 10mm bolts, but you'll have to check and see if they're. I send some 10mm button head cap screws with the kit to hold that on. They go on with an Allen wrench. And you don't necessarily need to do all of these. Got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them there, but I would probably try to catch at least 1, 2, 3 of them, and if you can get the others, great. That'll hold the whole top of this tightly against the block and pretty much keep anything up here from moving. And they should line up with those holes. Okay, that's another thing that tells you you're doing it right. If those holes are visible through those slots, we've got it right. And you can torque or twist or coerce some of these things because it's pretty thin tin, but if we're doing it right, we really shouldn't have to. Things should line up pretty well. So now your exhaust system is enclosed inside there. The exhaust manifold runs from one end to the other. Your exhaust turbine is inside here enclosed. That's the hottest part of the machine. And then the choke here that also runs hot is enclosed in here, and then you got a 90-degree elbow, and your exhaust pipe's coming up through this box-like structure and goes into the diesel exhaust catalyst up here. And if we do it correctly, and then we come back with our foil tape, and any place we've got a little gap or a hole that we don't like, we can fill in with some of that tape and tighten it up so that we keep some air pressure, clean air pressure on the inside of the box. Oh, there's the one piece I forgot to talk about. This piece is a filler here. Underneath that I have a larger hole. Let's see if I can hide that particular one. There, it's hid for right now. So you got a big cutout in here. There's a sensor line that comes out from the exhaust pipe, and this should allow that to come out without running into anything. It might be tight up against the dark gray piece here, but you should be able to bring it out there, and you can bend it a little bit if you need to make sure it comes through that hole, but it should clear in there. Once you have this assembled around it, then we can put this filler piece back on, and it'll slide around that sensor line. And again, it's got pedals. You can bend those out a little bit so that they run parallel to it so we don't hurt it, and give it a little more clearance around there. And then you can slap this up against both the face over here and the dark gray face here, and shoot screws through. I don't have holes because that sensor line it's pretty hard to know exactly where it's going to be. And so I made this so you can slide it in there and let it self-adjust, and then shoot screws through to hold it on and tighten up around that sensor line. The other thing I would do around this sensor line and around the one that comes up out of here, out of the top of the exhaust system, around both of those, again, you pay attention to these pedals and make sure we got enough clearance and that they run parallel to the line if necessary. Then you come back in with some of that foil tape and you fill in any gap that you got around here, and at the same time you're immobilizing that sensor line where it comes through here so it can't vibrate over against an edge. So you kind of lock it in place where it comes through there where it's safe. Okay, the other thing I would do with the tape, I usually split. The tape's like 2.5 inches wide, and you don't need all that width. You can cut a long strip of it in half, so you got like 1.25 inches, and run a strip along edges like this over the joints and over the screw heads. And by running it over the top of the screw heads, you it acts like Loctite on those. It keeps them from vibrating, because otherwise they're just sheet metal screws through thin sheet metal, and the vibration of the engine can rattle them loose. With a little bit of that foil tape over the top, they're not going anywhere. This round hole here is where your clean air is going to enter the box. We do that with a stub entry, a HVAC type stub entry, and then go on to a HVAC Flex 90 that gives you some flexibility how you hook up the rubber line that then transitions to the aluminum air lines that run to the blower. So that's the tin kit for a 7250. We've stepped through all of the steps of installing it. If you watch this video, it's boring as heck, I know, but it will prepare you a whole lot for how to do it on the combine. And if you can be on the combine and you have a question about the installation on the video that's there, I would come back to this one if necessary to see, well, how did that, which piece laid on top here, which one goes above, which one goes below. The other thing I tell people is when you assemble this tin on the bench, it's not color coded like it is here. It's just all shiny galvanized tin, but you can come in with half a dozen different colored Sharpie markers and make lines across all these junctions and wherever the pieces change from one to the other to show which one lays on top and which one goes underneath while it's assembled on the bench to match this video. And then when you get on the combine, you have to take it all apart to put it back on the combine. Then you can, it's kind of just line up the color marks that you made on it to go back together so that you don't have to guess or wonder which piece went on top here, how do these line up. Okay, let's look underneath here just a minute. There's a slot over in here on the bottom. There's a bracket that supports your exhaust pipe, and it goes through part of this. It sticks down enough that it comes up from the bottom and it comes through this in this spot. So the pieces have to fit around that. I believe that I have it cut here so that it should fit around it as it comes to you. But if it doesn't, for some reason, there's some variation between one installation and another, one machine and another, you could end up cutting the tin here a little bit if you end up with an interference with that thing such that it won't clear it when it's all put together. It just wants to bump into it. You can adjust this slot either deeper or wider or whatever in order to make it clear that bracket. Similarly, there's a knockout or a cutout here, fits around a bolt on the top of this thing. There, anywhere that you put it together and, well, gee, you needed another 1/8 of an inch or something, you can trim. Although hopefully now that I've installed it on a brand new combine and I made the adjustments to make it so that it should fit, hopefully you don't have to do that. But it is possible if necessary that you can adjust these pieces in places where they want to interfere. Okay, so that's the tin set. Once you've looked at this, you can go on to bending up the tin, assembling it on the bench, and then putting it on the combine. Good luck with your installation.